Bun venit la un nou episod IndieCast și primul pe acest an, deci la mulți ani, la emisiunea dedicată creatorilor independenți de jocuri și a poveștilor lor. Eu sunt Tudor Sprânceană, iar astăzi avem un invitat special din scena indie internațională, Jeremy Nelson, fondatorul și lead game designer la Little Buffalo Studios, un studio responsabil pentru viitorul survival crafting Aki One Survival. Vom discuta despre drumul creatorului, filozofia din spatele jocului, detalii despre lumea Aki One și multe altele. Haideți să începem. Jeremy, thank you so much for having joined us. It's been a long time in the making, the meeting. We haven't seen each other since Gamescom, if I'm not mistaken. So once again, welcome. Let's just start by having you present yourself and the studio, and then we'll see where this takes us.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for having me, and nice to reconnect after Gamescom. I feel like we're probably both feeling a little bit more rested. The show is so busy. So I'm a producer and founder of Little Buffalo, and we're making Aki One Survival. Aki One is like a chill but really deep survival crafting game with a talking campfire and some minor roguelike elements in it as well. So basically you explore during the day, you go back to the fire at night to learn survival skills, but you have to choose your questions for the fire carefully, because the knowledge you unlock basically will determine if you're able to make it through 4 complete seasons in the game. And there's also a story that unfolds in story mode as well too. So it's not just pure sandbox. That's the main title we're working on. Have another one just got a little bit of funding for, but can't quite talk about it yet. We're looking to go into kind of an off Steam early access in the summer. So doing early access, or what I may call earliest access, but it will be probably through itch or Epic, and we'll save the Steam release for sort of later on in spring of 2027. So that's about where we're at. It's a team of right now 4 full-time people and a couple of contractors, and we've been at it for a couple of years now. So kind of have a playtest out now on Steam. Should have a new version of that really soon, actually. So hold off on playtesting it if you haven't already yet, just because we'll be updating that with some cool new features that we've been working on over the Christmas holidays. And that's kind of a quick rundown of us. We're based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, although we have team members in Montreal and also in what would probably be considered the far north, although it's only kind of the middle, really. But right. Canada goes so far north that most of us consider anything in the middle to be pretty far north, too.
I've actually seen that part of Canada. So for me, I've been twice there. And for me, it was, it's one of the more magical trips I've been on, since I was born, I think. And that's the only part of North America I've seen so far. So for me, North America equals that part, exactly the east coast of Canada. Awesome. So you've been keeping very busy, it seems, since Gamescom. I really wanted to ask you something that, sort of lingered in my mind from last time. How did the original concept evolve for Aki One? Because it's something very special, at least for me.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so it kind of came out of wanting to, I think, do a different take on survival crafting. So a lot of our team members are Indigenous, myself included. I'm Red River Métis, and we literally have ancestors who survived this way. And so I think one of the things a lot of us noticed is that there's things that are missing in survival crafting games that just kind of aren't right. One story I always like to tell is the first thing you do in most survival crafting games is you start cutting down trees, which, if you were actually trying to survive, would probably be a really stupid thing to do. Because first of all, a lot of trees fall by themselves in the woods. If you've ever been in the woods, you notice there's a lot on the ground already, especially for firewood. But also, it's a huge amount of energy. You'd be totally exhausted. You'd be sweaty. You'd be cold that night. And all you get for it is one tree that you could have picked up off the ground. So the actual way trees were felled, if you need to fell a big tree, is you would literally pack mud around it and light a fire underneath it. And then after a couple of days of a fire, you could push the tree over. So the idea behind the game was kind of let's relook at every single thing that's in survival crafting and go okay, is this really how it would be done? Or would you actually die if you did this? So really examining it from that point. And then building that obviously straight into the mechanics and the gameplay. So it's a really authentic survival crafting experience. But then also the heart of it is really this talking fire. And that kind of came out of this idea that like, basically the one thing humans have shared, no matter where you're from, since like the dawn of time, is that we've sat around a fire. And if that fire kind of was alive and listening to us talk, it would know every skill there is. So it becomes almost like this grandparent in the game that it wants you to figure things out for yourself. So it doesn't give you all the answers. So it'll be like, you know, see if you can find a plant that's perfect for your shelter. It won't tell you right away what that is. So it's not like just pure fetch quest. You still have to figure out what you're doing. But if you get really stuck, kind of like a nice grandparent, it will kind of also help you out too. So that becomes this really fun way to be able to tell a much more like authentic story about like all of these crafts in the game, because you're kind of having this like it unfold with this knowledge from the fire and sometimes the stars as well, to kind of go even deeper into some of the knowledge. So yeah, so we were really like as fans of the genre, but like wanting to do something, you know, different to it. And it's really been fun in play testing it, because we found like we have this like really cool range of like players. Some of them have like 3,500 hours on Arc and, you know, love it. In fact, a couple of our major play testers, I think they had a conversation on our Discord about who had played more. How to best edit INI files too and things like that. So they're
gamers always challenging each other, you know, like I've played more, you've played more.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then other people have come up and said, you know, like I used to really dig that, but I'm like kind of tired of it, or I'm like super duper busy, and the amount of time and energy I have to put in just to like be rated or have, you know, myself get attacked by a bear and die and start all over again. So all of those elements, you know, I think create also this place for like, if you're, you know, maybe you're playing a hardcore survival game, but this is kind of like a slightly more chill, but still really deep and fulfilling thing you can play on the side. Or maybe you're, you know, kind of the type of gamer or whatever, because your life is super busy, that like the idea of that level of like 4 hours of commitment to like make a little bit of progress isn't really what you're into that night. And this kind of fits there too. So yeah, so it's been really fun. Like I feel like based on our playtesting at Gamescom, where we had 4 stations going and it was packed the whole time, and then also at PAX, which we've been to too, as well as online testing, like we really feel like we're doing something fun and different that people haven't seen before. And I'm getting really excited for our kind of earliest access release in the summer to really bring more and more people into playing the game and helping build it with us.
I've actually played the demo myself, so you know I actually left you some feedback, and you did actually contact me on that. But the main point was for me as well. It felt like something different. So I've played some survival games. I'm not a huge fan, but I don't hate them neither. You know. So then when I played yours, at least the first thing I felt is indeed it was a bit more chill, which for me actually fits my persona, so to say, because I like to do all the scavenging and, you know, picking things up and exploring, but I don't really like it, you know, when it becomes too difficult to handle, as in, you know, everything attacks me, the trees attack me, everything, you know. So I actually enjoyed that part, you know. And the next question is actually tied to something I found very interesting as well. I know there are some seasonal changes, and these affect you and the environment as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way the game sort of is set up is that you fall from the sky and you end up on this island. You're not sure exactly why, except that you're like the latest visitor here. And for some reason, people have been flying into this space and not surviving through winter and into spring. And so immediately you kind of have it on your mind that there's this kind of pending challenge in front of you of like getting ready for winter and seeing if you can get through it, which is really fun. And so I sort of mentioned that and this may not have been in the demo you played, but like we're starting to introduce like tiny bits of like very rogue light elements, but that kind of give it that bit of fun. So like one of the things is you could be making decisions about what you're doing, and then the next month comes and all of a sudden like all of these berries and all of these berries are just no longer there, or something that you weren't able to harvest, you can now harvest now. Or perhaps you like, you know, went and you like harvested the heck out of something only to realize that you actually needed something it was going to produce in spring and now you don't have it. So, you know, we have like a cozy mode. So I'm not like trying to say that like this is a spreadsheet game where you have to keep track of all of that, but it does have that level of depth so that like you feel like things are changing, and that, and it's actually based on like, what happens. We're very loosely basing it kind of around a whole area around the Great Lakes and up into the far north, that's called like the Canadian Shield. And it's this really interesting landscape that I don't think has really like been a part of many games before. And so one part of the fun of it is also like bringing this whole place to life, because I don't think it's really been showcased perfectly, if at all, in many games. But yeah, that seasonal change is a really big part of it, and I think part of the fun of it, I'm sort of like, I like that kind of bit of planning part of it, where you're like, and that feeling, like we have a tracker for like your winter stores, so you kind of have a sense, like you kind of know, like the days are going to get shorter, like, as right? Like, I think if you live in a place that has real winter, like real winter changes everything, right? And the days are shorter, it's cold, like you're not going to be able to do all these things you do. So the choices you make in fall really end up impacting what you're able to do in winter. So so that's a really fun part of it, that I think in the next build, which we'll be putting out, I think we'll have even more to that, in terms of like a whole refined eating system that sort of you need to balance a little bit, because obviously certain things, if you didn't stockpile them in the fall, might be in a bit of trouble come winter. And then also just, that seasonal change where it's like, oh, I guess there's no more raspberries anymore. Interesting, right? So yeah.
It's basically like real life. You have to plan ahead, because if I don't buy whatever groceries I need when I go home and I want to make a sandwich, I'll end up saying, okay, but I don't have any cheese, how am I going to make a sandwich?
Totally.
So in the end, it's sort of like that. Actually, we have in Romania, we've had somebody previously on the show who did something somewhat or roughly similar, but it's called Arcadian Days, and it's basically the same idea, in the sense that it's all about exploration, and soaking in the atmosphere. But he was saying, he was trying to get back to his roots, like you were saying. He was doing something about the Romanian country, the countryside. So here's, two things that apparently don't really look alike, but then when you come to think about the concept behind them, is basically the same. So switching a bit the discussion, I'll go into the mechanics of it. When did development for Aki 1 start?
Yeah, for sure. So it started kind of informally, I'm going to say pretty much like 2022, by the time we actually sort of got going on it. And I think it's probably like a studio story as old as time, where basically I was working at another place, which I won't name, but wasn't that great. And I was working with a couple of really awesome people who were really great, and also weren't necessarily happy there. And so we were able to secure a little bit of funding, mostly just for development. I continued to do contract to contract work for that all 2022, and would kind of jump in a little bit on game design. But at this point, it was like really like, the most important thing was like the lead artist and the lead engineer. And while I, play a role in those things, I wanted to keep those like going more than anything else. So that kind of team, chipped away a little bit. We got to kind of a prototype where we could pitch it. At that point, our art director, I won't say he got poached, but because we were waiting to see where we were going to go with that pitch. He ended up going on to a Sony studio, which worked out good for us in the end, because I don't know, I can't say how the experience would have been entirely for him, but it turned out that studio was working on Concord. And so when all of that disappeared, he was like, oh, I'm ready to come back and work on an indie. Plus I'm bringing some like, pretty cool AAA experience from it. So that was kind of awesome, actually. So he rejoined us more later on the production stage, and then myself and a lead developer were chipping away at it for the better part of a year and a half, and then, or a year, I guess. And then we got, we're fortunate in Canada, we do have some additional sources of funding. We also won a small award from Unity 3D, and we rolled that into being able to have a production budget, and that's kind of what basically got us going. We were doing it right in the sort of start of all the chaos in the gaming industry, so we really deliberately kept the team tiny, and because we basically knew it was going to be kind of like at least a year, maybe 2 years of mayhem. And I feel like sometimes studios, unfortunately, can get a bit of funding move into the nice office, hire a ton of people, and then a year later be like, oops, we're going to need a lot more money to
Go
actually
back.
finish
Yeah.
this. Yeah. So we kept it like all work from home and like, a mix of like full-time and contracts. I do other things on the side sometimes, just to basically make sure we knew we could make the game that we really wanted to make. And even if it took a little bit longer, we'd have that. And I think that was really handy too, just for like having the time to like play test, to get that feedback. And it's always like tough when you play test, because if you're a developer, the 19 things in the game that you want to do but you haven't done yet. But even like doing, getting it out into the world, I think is really important, because you can kind of help figure out which of those are most important, and then build on the things that players are liking, which is like kind of the stage we're going into now in terms of the journey. Like, so started back in 2022, and we're kind of moving into this like real open development phase. I call it like earliest access as opposed to early access, in the sense that it's still kind of like what early access used to be, but I think early access now is almost basically launch. So this is like a chance for people to play a pretty like a bigger version of the game, and then really their feedback will shape the development over the course of the next year. And that's something that's really important for us, and I think that's something that people have responded to. Like, I feel some, I don't want to like slag all like AAA stuff, but I know there's a lot of because I play those games too, but I know there's a lot of frustration at times with things like microtransactions, or things that like really don't feel like they're serving the player base anymore. And one of the nice things I think about this, in chatting with you and chatting with a few other streamers, is that feeling of like, some people feel really abandoned by, big publishers, and that they're not really making, the game for the players anymore. And I think especially if you grew up like playing games from like, say, the 90s or 2000s and so on, you grew up in an era where you really felt like the games were really being made with love for you. And part of like doing that open development is that we kind of want to be back in that kind of place ourselves with players, and that feeling like, I know you're making this with us, and this is really like listening to what you like. Because I don't think there's any wrong answers with that. Like, I think, you can do like big auteuristic sort of things where you're like, come along with me for the ride, I'm going in this crazy direction. But like for us, it's like about creating this like really fun experience that kind of listens to what players want.
No, actually, what you're telling me makes perfect sense to us, because even us we're actually the only magazine, like gaming magazine in Romania, and we're sort of a startup ourselves. So exactly what you were saying, the whole idea of creating this magazine came out of we want to create something out of our heart. It doesn't have to be profitable necessarily. But in the end, things that you do with your heart yield the biggest rewards, So coming a bit back to something you were telling before, and you sort of touched a bit on it. For example, what funding options are there in Canada? Because in Romania, for example, the state doesn't really give a crap about, what people are doing in this area. I think people here in Romania themselves consider games as something very trivial, something very childish. So tell us a bit about this.
Yeah. So I think there's like some similarities there and differences. So I think, I think it's easiest to explain it almost in sort of like how this all evolved. And this, all of the sort of supports for whether it's games, TV, film, things like that, grew in the 1960s and 70s, really on this as like, the US became a global entertainment superpower, and they're like basically right beside us. I think there was a realization that if like there wasn't some investment in it, that like, I don't know what, exactly, Canadian culture would become. And also just on an industry side, forgetting like just culture, would we even have like an entertainment industry that existed here, or would it all just be made south of the border? And so we wouldn't, have that at all. And I think that kind of, mix of like wanting an economy, like an entertainment industry, but also wanting that culture really sort of spurred on the first wave of it. And, it kind of happened first really with music. There were like requirements about like how many Canadian songs were played every hour on radio and things like that. And you know, and I think it's pretty hard to deny that that actually had a massive impact, right? When you think about like, I don't know, like Weekend or you know, Drake, or like all these huge, you know, international acts that are all like from Canada. And in, you know, the 60s and 70s, we had almost nothing, and it really built that into something great. And I think the similar thing has been happening in gaming. You know, like one of the funds, that the Canada Media Fund, which supports gaming projects, it also supported Long Dark, which is of course one of the best known, and that's how that got off the ground, right? And that's like kind of one of the best known survival games of all time. And it's fun to think also that Don't Starve was also made in Canada and BC. But we seem to be good at this type of genre. But
I've actually played the game, so it was a very
yeah,
good title to play during the pandemic. You know, it was just spot on.
totally.
So
Sweet. Yeah. And so yeah, it's I think it's because of that we have it now. The same, and so there's the Canada Media Fund, which supports a bit of gaming. It was mainly created for TV and film, and or sorry, for TV. There's a separate one for film. And so there is like I don't know how to call it. I'll be careful with my words here, but like there is a bit of controversy in the sense that like gaming is obviously, you know, I mean, there's what, 1 billion registered users on Steam, right? Like it's just this huge way to connect and do all sorts of like amazing projects, sort of like you were talking about the Romanian creator and his game, and like just like the diversity of projects and ideas in this like gaming space is huge. But unfortunately, I think we're in a very similar space, where most people here still think of it as sort of they either think of it as like, yeah, very silly and like having no merit and nothing, you know, or they think of it basically every game is Grand Theft Auto, and the only purpose of
yes,
gaming is to beat up prostitutes, essentially. And sometimes, so I've had people like you, and I chat with people who aren't gamers, and I tell them I work in this industry. Some people have like looked at me like I'm a horrible person because they immediately assume like that's what I'm making. And you're like, there's a
you know
lot
what?
more.
What's ironical for me is that actually, although people, you know, usually associate games with Grand Theft Auto, like you said, it's been actually Dan Houser from Rockstar Games who has been one of the more influential people to try to make people see that games are not just, you know, this silly thing. So it's sort of counterintuitive
Yeah.
because the guy that created GTA sort of tried something, but ended up, you know, people associating games in general with his product, which was, like you said, about killing and, you know, sort of doing all these wrong things that society doesn't really accept. So
Yeah, it's
um,
weird because like it seems like people have a different standard for when you're the player doing it, as opposed to like, you know, the body count in an action film is pretty high, right? So it's just interesting. Yeah, that side. But like, so I feel like we, on one hand, we're super grateful. On the other hand, when you compare the amount of like support that exists for gaming compared to the support that exists for like TV, it's like a tiny fraction. And it's something that we're constantly trying to, you know, talk about and address. It's not, you know, I worked in TV for a while. I'm not trying to knock that industry. It's just that I don't think people really appreciate that, like, you know, both culturally but also like economically, like you can like release a game and immediately reach a potential audience of 2 billion people. You can't do that in other industries, right? And so that's really worth investing in. So we are very fortunate being in Ontario, in Toronto, Ontario, that we also have a provincial organization called Ontario Creates, which is awesome. And they also provide some funding. So it's really, it is fortunate that those all exist. I know from talking to people at them that like they're oversubscribed, like maybe 1 in 10
yeah,
applications gets approved. So it's not like it's this like magical thing where everyone who has an idea gets it, right? Like, you know, our production funding for Akiwan, it was 100-page application, right? It had, so
oh, okay,
it was a lot. Like it was a marketing, like full business plan, full marketing plan, full creative plan, a whole bunch of like budgets, CV. Like it's not. I think that's the other thing too, is sometimes people hear like, oh, government funding, and they think it's just kind of like, oh, they're just tossing around cash, but it's actually a very
yeah,
serious competitive process. And CMF kind of acts like a hands-off publisher, so they get 15% of gross for 7 years as for their investment. So it's better terms than most publishers for sure, but it's not like that there isn't like a payback as well with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think it's, you know, a lot of people think of it as a good model. And I think the economics of it, when you actually like go down into it, like they make a lot of sense in terms of the type of jobs that are supported and the potential for breakout hits. And I think even if you end up going the publisher route, the fact that I think what's really, really unique, and I'll stop blabbing on about this. I'm also on the board of.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
Yeah.
This is what this is for.
Yeah, I'm also on the board of Interactive Ontario, which is like our industry association. So I know a fair bit about this and end up talking about it a fair bit. But like the other really cool thing, and I think the most important thing that we do is that we fund prototypes. And there are places in the world and other places that fund production of things. But I think Canada is pretty unique in the fact that we will fund prototypes of games. And that's actually the hardest part to sort of get off the ground. And then from there, you can go to a publisher with the prototype. But like nowadays, publishers won't even look at you unless you have like a pretty strong playable and usually some evidence of like market traction, right? So it's almost like, you know, I think in a funny way, a lot of the other funding models, they're kind of maybe for another time when production was great, but now it's really like until you do the prototype and you try a bunch of ideas and get one that's really working, like you don't even know where you're going. And so I think that's a huge strength of the system that no one else that I know of really has. And so, yeah, very fortunate, like, and yeah, incredibly grateful that we have it. And, you know, I really try hard, not just to make culturally interesting games, but also to make successful ones, because like, I want to repay that 15%. I want it to be a success, and for that money to go back into funding more games, right? That's not a burden to me.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. It's like a Ouroboros, you know, it's like the snake eating its tail, because if you have success, you know, then that success also goes back to the state. The state can fund more. So even more people can have success. So I think this is a way of thinking, like a modern way of thinking, like a 2026 way of thinking, which in my country, unfortunately, I wish we had that. People just don't see it at this point. So and there have been success. There has been some success with some prototypes, like you said. I don't know if you know the game RV There Yet. It's sort of a survival game.
Yeah.
You have this RV, right? So they claim, and I do believe them. They developed the game in like 4 months, and then they had like 1 million copies sold in a week or so, something of this sort. So they had a huge success in a very short time. And I saw some people arguing that you know, supporting prototypes, because this game at the beginning was nothing, you know, anybody thought would gain traction, you know, and in the end it sort of, I think it outlisted some AAA games that were coming out at the same time. So exactly like you were saying, you know. But speaking about, you know, success, let's go to the other side. What were some moments you felt like, you know, you were ready to give up on the project, or let's say some bigger challenges you faced? Maybe you weren't that bad.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, well, there's a few things. So one of the things I think is what I saw some other developer call the whole damn middle of a project. And I think that's a good way to describe it. There is like I feel like we're kind of getting to the stage where we're leaving that, but like, man, like in the middle of things at times, you kind of feel like you're like, oh, we're only like, you know, 30% away from being done. And then like 2 months later, you're like, we're only 30% away from being done. And then a year later, you're like, we're only 30% away. And it starts to, you kind of, you know, you have that like sort of anxiety, like, are we going to get this done? Are we going to, you know, are we going to run out of money? Like how, you know, so I think that's a huge one for sure. And weirdly, like I actually found, I know there's a lot of debate about like the value of in-person gaming festivals compared to online, because they are expensive. And again, we was fortunate to be able to go, but I actually found that was kind of the way out of the whole damn middle problem. So when you know, you're like, okay, we're going to PAX East, whatever state the game is in, that's how it's going to be. And it's going to be in front of a bunch of players. And like the travel's booked and the exhibit stand is booked and we're going. And so I think those like created not like deadlines, but almost like almost like a mini launch or something, right? Where you didn't feel I mean, I still did, like PAX East was the first, that's in Boston was the first big time where we did a big exhibition, and it was honestly, it was terrifying. Like you go there, like you've shared this, you have a feeling you're onto something, okay, but like you're putting it in front of like anyone who's traveled from across like the entire eastern seaboard of the US to go to the PAX is a super fan, and a super fan of usually PC gaming, right? And so now you're going to show it to them. Like this is like if these people don't like it, you're in a lot of trouble. And so
some of these guys, I think, can be very cruel. I know gamers; they're very, like, I hate this. Like, come on, you can hate it all.
Yeah. There can be like it can be like very direct too, and I think that's like some of us can be very in a good way on the spectrum, and so the feedback can be direct, and you're like, wow. So yeah, I mean, that was, on one hand, it was a way to get through those sort of problems. On the other hand, it was like scary. Like it was, the first people sit down and start playing, and you're almost like you almost like have a stopwatch, and you're like, I hope you stay for more than 5 minutes, or else I'm in like. And then when some people start staying for like really long time, or there's one player at Gamescom which like was probably one of my two favorite moments there, and they'd played the game for maybe 2 hours the day before.
Wow, okay.
And then I saw them hanging around the stand the next day, and they jumped back in and restarted, and like they wanted to finish all the content we might have, no matter. And it was just like, wow, I'm like, I can't ask for anything more than that. So it's been like that, that bit of a ride of like, terror, and then, joy, and then terror. So I think that's been one big thing. I would say another big thing, which we're currently like kind of addressing, but I don't know if it was an oversight on my part, but I think it's something that a lot of people who make games experience, is sometimes you can get so focused on like the moment to moment gameplay that you're forgetting about how you're going to tell the story of the game, right? And I heard someone break it down into like engagement and appeal. And I was really focused. I'm like, and I think it was the right decision. Like survival crafting is a popular genre. It always has been and probably always will be. So to a certain degree, if you're making a good game, you will find some degree of audience. But also like the things, I've been chatting about, it's hard to like, go, oh yeah, it's like this really more authentic thing and all the rest. And you need a few minutes to like really, and then people are like, I get it, that's cool. But like, how does that translate into 30 seconds, right? And so that's been something sort of been working through, and we will have like a really cool, I hesitate to call it a cinematic trailer because that implies like it's cinematics and not actual gameplay, but it will have like the feel of a cinematic trailer, but at the actual gameplay, that I think is going to get us into that kind of, as someone I think described appeal is like, I want to play a game even though I've never played it. And, having that has been, I think, an interesting challenge. And I think that's been like one of the ups and downs where you see you're getting a lot of engagement at like events like PAX or Gamescom, but you're like missing this crucial piece that like has a like virality to it, right? And so so there's a few things on that I think that have been really good lessons. I think I don't know. I think, and then just like I mean, I'm so fortunate. Like everyone on our team is awesome, but I think we all had to grow and learn like the best ways to work with each other. We're all different, and obviously like work from home is like really great in a lot of ways, especially in like Toronto, which has horrible traffic problems. Like even though I live in the same city as two of my team members, it would literally take me 2.5 hours to get to them probably. And so we don't see each other a lot in person, and I think it can be tricky. You have to be really careful about how you express things in that sort of environment. And then when you're doing design docs, and that was a hard lesson I learned, like you kind of have to really over explain and give lots of examples, because ideas can kind of just get that little bit confused and without that. And so there's just been some lessons on that I've really had to learn. So I mean, those are the big ones. I don't know if there's been any like horrible moments so far, but there have been, there's moments of doubt, and there's just that sort of, okay, like we're here, this is great, but there's 19,000 games a year being released on Steam alone, right? And so that, like,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, no matter how good people may say it is or like what we're doing, there's still that underlying anxiety about, like, how's this really going to go? And so, yeah.
Right,
So I mean,
right,
that's, I think, where, being really cautious with our runway and being very slow and steady has been very helpful, because it's not like we're breathing down this,
right.
horrible deadline. So
This is sort of like beauty. They say it's in the eye of the beholder. So from one perspective, I say it's 9 million games, 9 billion games being released, and so on. But then if you come to think of it, especially sometimes in my case, when I release something, where I do something that is not uniquely in the sense of the product, I'm thinking, why shouldn't I believe that mine is going to be the first of the 9 million release? Because maybe it has the energy it needs, or maybe it just has the appeal that people want. So coming back a bit to what you were saying earlier, that part of the development process is the community and meeting with them at different conventions and such. There's this convention happening actually in May. It's called Endix, and it's going to be specifically online, which is sort of weird. I actually participated last year in it, and you get to have your booth online and everything. Basically, you're participating at a Gamescom-like convention from the comfort of your seat. So maybe that's worth checking out.
yeah, absolutely. Antics.
Endix, yeah, it's
Yeah,
actually part of
Antics.
Steam, something like this. Anyway, going even
Yeah,
further back to something you
yeah,
said earlier, uh, you talked a bit about the importance and the influence of heritage, like the Canadian heritage on the
yeah.
game. And I was going to ask you, like, how your team's cultural heritage fits in the game. I mean, have you adapted some specifics?
Yeah, I mean, I think, on sort of like the indigenous side, I think it really comes from like an appreciation of how cool and interesting and insightful these sort of like primitive crafts are. And I think when you call something like, oh, this is like primitive, it immediately puts it in a box, and it makes you think like
Yeah.
those people who made it are nothing like us and have nothing to, teach us, when in fact, like, it's pretty, incredible that you could have the insight out of, largely like plants and rocks to build this amazing array of things that allow you to live. And that takes an incredible amount of intelligence and skill, and it's not something that's recognized. And so that was always like hugely a part of it for me. Like, we have some memories of interviews. My dad was really into this too. So this is like an atlatl, which is that he made.
Wow.
So it's like deer antler and bone here and a counterweight. And basically, this is not in our game because it's from a bit earlier time, but it's a lever and it's a spear thrower, right? So this is what would have been used to hunt mammoths,
Right.
and it throws a spear over a football field in length with like the force of a 357 Magnum. So it's like a pretty cool piece of technology, right? And so part of that, yeah, I think part of the culture that came from that. I think sometimes, how can I put it? There's this sort of like term that people use about games, like especially with like, what would, I guess, probably more commonly called like Native American people or something in Europe.
Right.
But like it's called feathers and leathers, which essentially like the games only have, basically that's the only portrayal. And so by putting, a player in first person and making it about like, you're like, oh wow, this is like pretty cool that people figured this out. I think that kind of
Yeah.
communicates a little bit of like respect, but it was also like really important for me not to make a preachy game, like to make a great game first, and to find ways to take some of that like culture and put it in the mechanics and the gameplay, as opposed to just sort of text. So like, but or in the quests, right? So like I always like to highlight, like, in a lot of survival crafting games, like you touch a tree, it basically turns into a bow in your hands, and you're like shooting a bear or a deer or a moose in like 30 seconds, right? And so, like the hunting quest in the game is more based on like what it would be really mean to like be taught how to properly and respectfully hunt. So like instead of like, you know, when you ask the fire for help with that, the fire isn't like, oh yeah, here's a bow, go shoot a bunch of stuff, right? It's like, okay, let's see if you got what it takes. So first of all, you're going to try to get close to a deer. And if you can get close to a deer, I know that you might have skill necessary to like be able to hunt that deer in a way that like, you know, first of all, you're actually going to be able to hunt the deer. And so it provides for you, but also you're not going to just like wound the deer and they'll run away. The deer will like have a miserable life. You'll have a miserable, you know, month because you have no food and no one's happy, right? So like thinking about how to break apart those stories has been a big part of it too, which I think at the end of the day, at least in what people have said, you kind of have a bit more like respect. You have respect for like the knowledge that allowed people to survive, and you also have respect for like everything around you. And it doesn't mean it's something that's like really tricky to talk about because sometimes some like Native American ideas have got like really wrapped up with like 1970s American hippie culture, and it's like thought of as this really hippie trippy thing, but it's actually like really practical, right? Like people respect, you know, how they respect winter and have a reverence for winter because like winter is like the ultimate judge. Like if you're an idiot, winter's going to judge you pretty harshly. And so, right. So I think, yeah, so that's kind of been a huge, I think part of that sort of journey. And it's interesting, like not all of our team is Indigenous. And so I think bouncing those ideas off people who are, you know, Canadian, but not from that background and seeing what resonates and what doesn't, because I'm really cautious about, I want it to be there because I think it's interesting. Like it's not there because it's like, I feel like people should know this. It's there because I think it's actually like kind of fun and fascinating. And so why wouldn't you want to share those details? Yeah. So I think that, kind of is how it kind of, is a part of the game.
I feel like your game is a sort of testament to, you know, human ingenuity. You know, it's like the fire, which was in the end invented by man. You know, like all these types of bows and, you know, utensils that, like you said, you have to work in order to build. So it's not like, I don't know, Minecraft maybe or something like this, where you just, you know, dig for something and in 2 or 3 seconds you have that tool. But I'm really interested in how the public reacted. Like, what were some, actually specifically, what were some funny reactions from the public? Because I know not all gamers are into, you know, putting the work for it. So they'll be like, no, come on, I'm not doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to think of like some of the more sort of funny ones. I mean, you know, we have this persistent bug that's part of our spawning system that is more or less fixed, but sometimes like animals get stuck inside of big rocks in the game. And I'm not sure exactly what, but like everyone, it's sort of funny because, you know, some of these things are a problem and you're like, okay, we are going to fix it. And then when you're showcasing that at a demo, like everyone tells you about it. And you're like, okay, here we go. Yep, I know the deer's in a rock. I know. I'm sorry. But for them, it's also like kind of like hilarious, right? So that's all good. There were some things just around like, so one of the like mechanics in the game is that every morning the fire can kind of leave you these little scrolls that provide you with like a little bit of extra help or gifts on your way. And oh man, was it hard to get people to pick those things up. Like, so they started off as like a scroll left by the fire on the ground. Because that would be like kind of poetic and nice, right? It's like you talk to the fire and then you wake up and the fire's left you to scroll. Nobody saw that freaking thing. So then we like, you know, put a glow around it. No one saw that. So then we had them floating in the air above the fire. It's like, oh, look, it's like a birch scroll floating in the air. You're like, maybe people will be like into that. They'll be like, oh, why is that there? No one. So then we made them bounce up in the air. And then some people saw them, but not everyone. And then they'd be missing some little piece of like, you know, that was right there, but they're off exploring for the day, which is cool that like the world is like enticing enough that people are like, I'm taking off. But so then we added a flame effect. And then more people saw them, but still not everyone. So then we finally added like a pop-up that basically appears. So if you don't take the scroll after about a minute and a half, it's like this pop-up that will not clear until you take the scroll. Like it basically will keep on reminding you every minute to like, don't forget to grab the scroll. Which in a sense is like basic tutorialization, but I didn't want to do a full tutorial. I wanted it to like feel like from the moment you're in the game and the tutorial is really playable. And that's been a real challenge, but it's led to sort of funny moments like that. But and then I think that some of the reactions too have just been around balancing like that authenticity of like the experience where you're like trying to be like true to what it means to survive. And so there definitely are a lot of players. One of the persistence comments was like from some players has been like, why can't I build a massive base, right? Like right away. And you're kind of like, well, because that would be like, you wouldn't really do that, but they're like, but I want to build a base. Like, and I think, because
actually
of,
call this the Minecraft effect, because people playing Minecraft have been, so how to say, used to actually building some. The first thing you have to do is grab some resources and build something. So the Minecraft effect, I guess.
Totally. No, it's 100% true. Like I think it's a lot of like, like Minecraft or Forest players or things like that. Like it's really like I got to build a base. Like I don't know, the zombies might come or whatever.
Exactly.
So having that. So I mean, I think in sandbox mode, which eventually we will have, like we're focusing on story mode because I think story. I think one of the reasons say something like Subnautica was so well loved was because it had a story. Like it wasn't just a sandbox. You could be sandboxy and make your base forever if you wanted to, but there was something that unlocked. Well, we've been focusing on story mode, but to address that, I think we will have a more sandboxy mode. And what I think I'll be trying to do is I'll be trying to reach out to like Indigenous or Native American architects and designers and ask them to like, what would they design a base be? What would it be like? So that, the base, well, totally not what you would need to do to survive probably. And I think like, in the game, you'll have to build a separate winter shelter. You start off with and like that it is really cool how those work. But of course it's not really like that full sandbox. Oh, I'm going to build something, cool in the trees. And so I think especially if we could tie that into culture a little bit, then I'd be like, because I don't know, for me, it's like, okay, like building a log cabin is just kind of, it's been done. I don't think it's worth like doing a lot of effort into it. But if we could come up with like some sort of base building thing that actually, was both fun, but also told an interesting story, I'd be more down with that. So
makes sense. Yeah, I can see it integrating somehow. If, like you said, you get some advice, like how specifically architecturally specific to get it in the game, I think that can actually work.
Yeah.
So, I'll switch to something more personal, let's say.
Sure.
Discuss you as we're slowly edging towards the end. I really want to know what motivated or still motivates you as a developer yourself, and
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good question. I mean, I think there's a few things. I mean, I think one of it is knowing. I mean, I think part of it is like being like a lot of people in this industry, a little ADHD and like, or a lot of times. And, I know that indie dev or small studio dev is still, no matter all the other things that you end up having to do that aren't so fun, like bookkeeping and other things, that it really is still kind of the most amazing collection of challenges and experiences that you'll get. And so that's like a huge part, I think, of the motivation for me is like that, you get to, have some really interesting problems all the time to solve. And you don't have to necessarily deal with a massive bureaucracy in order to make them real. And so, I think I remember watching this like talk by, I think it was like an original Bethesda founder, like creator of like Fallout 2 or something, who then was kept on with Bethesda, throughout all the rest of it as a game designer and advisor. And he wanted to like change one system. And he was like, it's 3 lines of code. Like it was like a conversation system. And they're like, I'll be 3 developers, 4 weeks. And he's like, it's 3 lines of code. Can I just do it myself? And they're like, no, you can't. And so like, I think not that, I have like friends who are in the AAA space and I play them and I'm not trying to knock it. I just think there's something about me at times that like really just likes to get things done. And so it's really fun being in this space to be able to do that. And that's a big motivator as well. And I think the community is a big motivator. Like, I'm co-organizer of bi-monthly game dev meetup here in Toronto, and the people there are really great, and the conversations are really great, and the same goes for like these events. So that's a huge motivator. Is it feels like it's so funny. Like, again, similar to like that thing about like people who think that every game is Grand Theft Auto. I think a lot of people think that every community of people who make games is basically like 4chan. And so,
Right.
they'd be surprised to know that it's not. And so, so I think that's a real like strong motivator too. And I think I have to make a point of actually trying to engage with that, because I find you can get so heads down on work that you forget that you're part of that community, and that is one of the things that can give you energy, is seeing other people's inspiration and projects. And then like
it actually makes sense for myself, because we have this Romanian Game Development Association, which is one of the few things they've managed to do themselves. They have this monthly meetup. And when you go there at these meetups, it's exactly like you say. You talk to people and it's like, wow, I didn't know somebody actually thought about something like this, like some game. You feel like this should be a AAA. Not what we usually get fed up with. So I definitely agree with this. I mean, chatting, developer to developer, you actually get more ideas yourself, and then you end up also absorbing that energy, that some of them have when you're actually tired. And it's like, I'll give up the project.
Totally, and it's the surprises too. I would be probably bad if I didn't mention this. So I may have mentioned this. This is a new peripheral that we're part of helping launch at PAX East.
Yes.
So it's the Scentware, and it's this really cool, like tiny little device that pops
open. VR, right?
For any game. So AccuOne will have that. And so like when you're at events and you meet other people making cool tech and things like that, I feel like that's really fun too. So that's also been a thing that's real motivating, is like there's like genuine surprises where people are like you're like, wow, I never thought that was possible. That's really cool. So
can you tell us a bit more about this? Actually, when I started the interview, I was like, don't forget about it, because I know this is a very unique thing. And as we started chatting, I was like, okay, and then you showed it to us. I remember you mentioning it at Gamescom as well. So I know this is a partnership, right, with OVR, I think they're called, or something of this sort. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Sure, yeah. So I met them first at PAX East last year, and they're a tech startup that is looking at like how you would put smell into games and other experiences, and both like from like the UX side of like how does that feel really good, but also from the tech side of like how do you make a product that could actually do that, but isn't like I think when people like think about smell, they're thinking about like an essential oil diffuser sitting on their desk with a big plume of like water vapor and coming out, right? And so obviously like this little thing is a lot like different from that. And although I don't pretend to know the entire technology, I know that they have been working a lot with both like people who like manufacture like fine like French perfumes, and then people who are molecular scientists to come up with this thing that, in this case, this one is like largely nature, kind of, it's like nature and cooking smells, this little pack. So this is like the actual sensor in here. And it has like a smoky campfire, which is perfect for our game. It has like a bunch of different forest smells and sort of like an after the rain kind of smell and a few other things. And then you can kind of also mix them too to kind of come up with your own kind of custom combinations. And so, in testing and integrating that in the game, I've just found it like really, it takes it to like another like level for me, where like, I think I was like in like an evergreen forest, and it, and we're starting to add some of our music too, which is this whole other cool thing about what we're trying to do there. But and having the music, having the forest and the hand painted art, and then having like that little hint of like the smell of pine trees, and I realized I'm like, I like kind of zoned out. I'm just like watching a deer walk across, and then I was like, oh right, I'm supposed to be protesting this bill. So So it's really fun. Like I'm actually, I think like anyone else, when you start off hearing about new technology, you're like, oh, would that really work? But I think, for what we're doing, it really enhances the experience and it's a lot of fun. So
Right.
I'm hoping,
It's
I believe like with this, sometime after PAX, it'll be possible to kind of share these around a bit more. And so hopefully like they can kind of, it's obviously like it's really innovative technology that there's not going to be a lot of them in the world as they're scaling up manufacturing. But my hope is to kind of like, with all the people I've chat with, is just being able to like sort of ship them one so they can at least check it out for a little while and then ship it on to the next person kind of thing. So yeah, it's really fun. But there is a lot of people have asked, no, there are no fart smells.
okay, definitely. I can see people asking, all sorts of stupid stuff, but I think for one, I think this could be a game changer for the whole of gaming, the gaming industry. So I really hope you'll keep us in mind and maybe send one over so we can test it out ourselves. Because even when you told me about this in Gamescom, it sounded like, something from a far, far away realm, it's like, can we do this actually? So congrats on the idea. I mean, for me, I think it's very important to have that unique point of, sort of spinning a story. And this is one of them for your game. I mean, you have multiple, but this one for me, I think, is a instant winner. If you're like one of those guys that have trouble, paying attention when you say, you have smell technologies. Like what? What did you say? Okay, basically, it's interesting one. So congrats on the idea.
Thanks. They're really great partners, like OVR folks. They're sort of like I think in Vermont, so not really actually that far away from us, and they're just like
so they're Canadian based.
US, but like northern US, okay. Northern Eastern, and I don't know. We get along great, and I really like what they're doing, and it'll be really fun. They're sponsoring the Cozy Game Lounge this year at PAX, and so we'll be there and also on the floor with them. So it's it's nice. I mean, that's sort of going back to the point, just like it is a really supportive community, and like I think when you're in that smaller indie space, everyone is helping each other out. They are technically your competitors, but you're not. You want everyone else to succeed around you because you're usually doing something so different, even if it's in a similar genre. It's completely different. It's not like it's going to be competitive, right? So
I totally agree.
Yeah,
it makes sense. Yeah. So once again, going a bit towards the end, I have some 2 or 3 questions I still want to ask you, but there's one particular that stuck to my mind. Do you believe that games truly can change, perspectives and influence society positively, hopefully?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to that whole like I don't know, like Marshall McLuhan, like the medium is kind of like the message, right? So like what the medium is changes what's possible, and it's interesting because it was one of the things like that I struggled with in like a previous career where I was doing some like commercial doc TV and like doing stuff for Discovery and History Channel and all the rest. Is that like you were kind of constrained by what you could do, right? It was like very it had its own rules and the rules had to be followed, and that was what that medium could do. I think gaming can be it can be much broader, and I think while I don't know about the potential of like any art form necessarily to directly address like a specific issue, I feel like that's kind of like the realm of like politics and opinion writing and certain types of podcasts, and I feel like most things get really clunky when they try to do that. It feels forced on. But I do think like games kind of, I think our ability to connect with other people depends on knowing something about them and knowing their world, right? And while that doesn't like create peace and harmony on Earth instantly, obviously it does create the basis for which you can have like a deeper understanding and a genuine appreciation of people or stories or things that you never encountered before. And and I think games can do that really well. And it's not like, so like, I think sometimes when people think about impact, they're thinking about like a specific result. And it's not really like a specific result. Like, we're all the product, like each one of us, of all of these things we've had happen in our lives. And so if
Yeah.
you have those experiences where you get connected to something you weren't connected to, I think that's really important. I also think that games, can promote like connection at a time, when we, work from home world and all the rest, we're not like that, they can. And I think,
Yeah.
the growth of like so-called friend slop, genres, like cheap, co-op games everywhere, is like a real evidence of that. And so I think that's really important too. And I think, one of the things we're going to be, doing, even though it's kind of like, I think thought of as like quaint and like antiquated, is like having eventually some sort of more co-op, but just start with a couch co-op. Because one of the things we found at our
Yes.
demos is that couples and friends, but especially couples, like really enjoyed playing it. And they're like, this would be the perfect type of game that after dinner we could sit down and play for a while. So that's like, to be the idea that like games are invited into that like pretty special like space of like a couple or a family or something like that. Like that's pretty meaningful, and I think pretty impactful too. So I think there's there. And then I think just, yeah, broadly, like I think there's almost no doubt that like, while there certainly is issues around addiction, and I think
Yeah.
in games that are designed to be addictive, I've seen, and I'm not going to slag like Roblox, because there are good Roblox experiences, but I've definitely like, I've played those with my nephews, and every single trick in the book for mobile gaming is there to basically get you hooked on it, right? And then,
Yeah.
once you're hooked, it's impossible. And so, I don't think those are, but on the flip side, it's, it was very clear during the pandemic, and I mean, too, and there's been studies to back it up, that like games can have a really, really positive impact on mental health too. So, yeah, I definitely think that they have an impact and can have an impact. I just think it's not necessarily the place people are like looking for that impact. It is somewhere else, but it's in a really important spot too. So, yeah.
I totally agree. I agree. Firstly and foremost, I agree with the couple thing. I play with my wife. Most of the games I play, I usually look, do they have some sort of co-op? It doesn't matter, online or offline. But I really want to share this experience with my wife, because like, here's a cool game. Let's play it together. So we can both evolve, and it does help. Even in a solid relationship, it builds further on. There's always, it's just the sky's the limit. You can always build upon it and become stronger. So for me, this is very important. So once again, the game Aki1 seems for me the perfect fit. And then the second thing about addiction, I totally agree once again, and I think and fear that some of the bigger game companies do what they can to extend the experience, to try to hook you up so much that at some point the game itself doesn't even matter anymore. So I usually stay clear of this. I prefer shorter experiences and story-driven things. But I think raising awareness of this is very important for any type of gaming community. Um, well, since we're really getting close to the end,
Yeah,
what's
no worries.
what's like next for Little Buffalo Studios after Aki-1 Survival is released? You said something about a game that's maybe under development, but what else are you planning in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for Akiwan, if we have any level of success, we'll definitely be looking at like a DLC that would be in a completely different natural environment with completely different animals and plants. Because I think that story, like, we're kind of focusing on kind of like the Great Lakes area and further north, but like the story of that is pretty universal and could exist in lots of different places. And the way we built out sort of the back end systems of the game is not a massive like undertaking to potentially do that. I mean, it still would be work, but we always had that in the back of our mind, like, this is saying, like, everyone sat around a fire and everyone's had to learn to like live off of what's around them. And so I think we would like to definitely explore that in the game, in addition to like adding, I think, both some challenge modes for replayability and a sandbox mode. So those would all be
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
about co-op, which I talked about. Co-op hopefully will be there for launch, not after launch. And then we're working on another game that's even set kind of further north in Canada, and it was, what can I say? So it came about really, or like just organically by chance, by one of those fun conversations. So it was like GDC 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago now, and I'd wanted to chat with the creators of Dredge, because it was like a
I know
game.
Dredge, the
Yeah,
fishing game. Yeah.
and kind of chilling out and playing that one holiday break, I think. And so they're awesome. They're Kiwis, like they're from New Zealand. And we ended up like chatting for like a good hour, some plus. It was supposed to be just a hey, how you doing? But and during the course of that conversation, we were just kind of talking a little bit about how their game evolved. And I kind of had this idea for something that had some similarities, but was also very, very different.
Right.
But had a bit of a similar feel, but was set in the far north. And I'm like, kind of like, hey, you mind if I run with this? And they're like, it's your idea. You just kind of came up with it. Like, we don't express any ownership over it. Like, you can't copyright a game anyway. But like, so it kind of has evolved from there. And so we're just doing. I'm hoping we'll have by. Maybe as early as Gamescom, but I'm thinking that might be a little ambitious. Definitely by this time next year, having like a full, like at least hour-long demo of it, so that people can check it out and play it, and then we'll formally kind
That
of
would be awesome.
announce it. Yeah.
So I actually think, stuff like this, even our chat, like, and I'm going to pitch to you this idea, if you ever come to Europe, come to Romania, because we're big nature lovers. So I think we have the biggest population of brown bears, which basically means if you wander off in the wilderness, you might end up dead. But I know you have the survival skills since you're developing the game. But it's worth taking in perspective, because we have the last virgin forests in Europe. So
Amazing.
there's some stuff to explore here on the nature side.
Thank you for the invite. I'll take you up on that. I like that. Yeah,
keep in mind, it's like these discussions that start these small sparks, and then they grow up into something big. So you never know. If you end up in Romania, don't be a stranger. Right. So this was actually a very enticing conversation. I did tell you before that I believe that it's going to be this way, since I already saw your eagerness when chatting, and I already knew somewhat from Gamescom. What would be some final thoughts you think should be mentioned, I guess, to our gaming community, but to the worldwide community as well, in relation to your game, in relation to your experience as a developer, whatever you feel like is worth mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, I think as much as possible, support indie games, whatever they are. As much as possible, be careful on websites that are selling keys, because often there's a lot of those that are stolen, that nothing is going back to the developer for it. And I know like people's financial means vary, and but to the extent that it's possible, it is really great to be able to support. Like, it means a lot. If you like a game, write a positive review. That's like a huge one. Like, take a moment to do that. There's a study that came out recently that people's conversion rate on Steam, when they get to overwhelmingly positive from mostly positive, triples. So if you, it's huge. And so, and I think sometimes games, obviously are, middling reviews for obvious reasons. Sometimes, especially for indie games, the mixed reviews are not because there's something wrong with the game. It's because that some people who maybe are not the right audience for it played it, and then decided to leave a really negative review because they didn't personally like it, even though it was never meant to be that type of game. And so when you like something, it's really important, especially in the early stages of games, to write that, because it helps balance things out. Obviously, if you don't like it, you can review it negatively or not review at all. But I think those actually, people don't realize how huge of an impact that has. And while no one knows exactly the mysterious ways of the Steam algorithm in full, I think it's actually not one algorithm, it's like 12 different ones that all kind of
now
cooperate.
it's changed,
Yeah.
is what I heard. Now it's based on language of review or something of this sort. So it's even more complicated than before.
Totally. Yeah. So like reviewing in different languages really helps. Reviewing, generally like once you crack a certain number, it's going to get surfaced more, because at the end of the day, Steam wants you to buy the game. So, they'll surface things they won't surface things without positive reviews, and they definitely won't, surface it a lot without a lot of reviews. And then that allows, indie games to have a success and get featured on the front page and all the rest. So I think people who play games don't actually realize how much of an impact they actually can have on the success of that game. And so if you like something, say it. It makes a huge difference. So
Right. Okay, so Jeremy Nelson, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
This was an experience, a very nice experience. What can I say? I wish you good luck on behalf of our editorial team, and I think you'll definitely hit it with all your gizmos and all your ideas. I think it's going to be a huge success. And we're looking forward to actually meeting again when you have news and new things to share with us. I hope you also like this experience yourself.
Absolutely. It was a really great one. I will say Chimagwich, which is another way of saying big thanks, and merci. So yeah, thank you so much. It was really fun. I enjoyed it.